As Andrew said, I am from the Marketplace Institute at Ridley College. And the Marketplace Institute was actually formed, our tagline is Bridging Sunday and Monday. And so the title of the talk this morning is perfect because we're bridging church and work. We're bridging Sunday and Monday, that's what it's all about. And some of the juggle, some of the tensions between those two things. When I started work, I was actually a TV journalist. Very enthusiastic. I was a TV journalist in a regional town of Sydney, so not as good as you might think. It was a tough job actually. City TV journalists, they sort of flounce around. I don't know if you've seen them. I saw one the other day, and she spent at least half an hour in the front cab of the TV car just finishing off her makeup and preparing her outfit before she stood up and did her piece to camera. They do one story a day in the city on your Channel 7, your Channel 9 news. Down there in regional New South Wales, we had to find, film, write and make sure it was edited 3 to 4 stories a day. It was incredibly busy and tense. It was a real adrenaline rush. A movie that probably most of you weren't born for, Broadcast News. Does anyone remember that? No, okay. It's one of my favourite stories because it's about TV journalism. This movie has this scene where the woman, there's a production assistant who grabs the videotape from the editor and then she runs through the entire TV station, like diving under filing cabinets opening, leaping over people, and then she gets to the studio, slams the cassette into the studio just as the newsreader is finishing reading the intro for the story. And that may seem it's all set up for a movie, but we actually had that happen several times. So it was really tense trying to get this news program together. I was the most junior journalist on staff. I had very little credibility and influence. I think I only got the job because I was unemployed and it was a new TV station and they wanted to line their people up before they started, and most of the other journalists were working. Because I was unemployed, they said, great, she can be available, and I was. So what happened as a very junior person was that I saw my work being manipulated in little ways. So I did this very awkward interview with a couple who suffered from a sexually transmitted disease. Sorry to mention that at breakfast, but it actually appeared on the news that night. I was a bit shocked when the headline was, "Herpes epidemic sweeps Illawarra." I hope I never see that couple again. My boss compelled me to give him the details of the source that I used in an investigative story. He just wanted to follow it up. He actually rang my source at work and read his cover, which was an awful experience. And then there were the death knocks. I'm not sure if you know about these, but what happens is when you read the papers, find out there's been a terrible accident overnight or diving, something like that, then you rock up to the house where that person lived, camera rolling, microphone ready, and the person opens the door and you say, "How do you feel?" basically, which was awful. That was a horrible part of the job. I really disliked that. And in fact, all those 3 things that I just mentioned are not allowed in the journalistic code of ethics. But I felt they were things that I was compelled to do by my news director. With the death knocks, actually what I would do is I'd tell the cameraman, don't put the camera on, and I'd go up and I'd just knock on the door and I'd have a chat to them and say, look, do you really want to do this or not? It's a very unwilling journalist to participate in that. So I tried to sort of work against some of that pressure, but my news director explained to me, there's a long line of people who are just really keen to get this job. So just remember that as you use your ethics. So in facing this work stress and these ethical questions about my work, I found that my church wasn't much help. So I went up to my minister and I said, why is God asking me to do this job where I feel torn quite a lot? And he said, so you can promote our church fate. Oh, okay. And then he said, by the way, can you run the youth group on Friday nights? Which I did. But anyway. So what I actually felt was there seemed to be no link between what I heard on Sunday and what I was being compelled to do Monday to Friday. And then what happened was that it felt like that church was just another thing competing for my time, for my energy, for my emotional reserves. They were just these competing things. It was like there was this, if my life was a pie, there were all these pieces of pie. Work actually took up a lot of my waking hours. And I felt guilty if that ever ate into my God time or my church time. There seemed that there wasn't quite enough pie to go around actually. And that's why I think it feels like a juggle a lot of the time for us between church and work. One minister said to me recently that he was so frustrated that the people in his church all seemed too busy or too tired to actually participate in all the church programs he had arranged. He was very frustrated. And that's what I feel like on Sundays, even now. Sometimes I crawl to church, metaphorically, and I get there and I receive, the encouragement from people I know. I participate in the worship and I sort of get nourished, and then I walk back out into the world. That's what Sunday is sometimes like for me. But I think that's our problem. I think we're not meant to see these things as competing things. I don't think that's a helpful analogy. I think God actually wants all of our time. There you go, I just solved your problem, didn't I? It sounds really scary, but I think it's really true. So, what does Jesus say? He says, love the Lord your God with part of your heart, part of your soul, part of your mind, part of your strength. No, he doesn't say that, of course. He says, with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, with all of your strength. All of us, all of the time. Colossians 3:23 is one of my favourite verses. It says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, working as for the Lord, not human masters. And the reading that Diane read beautifully this morning from Romans 12. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. And when it says bodies there, it actually has a sense of all of us as a sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and prove what God's will is, his good, pleasing and perfect will. So there's a sense that if we give God everything, then we will know what to focus our time on. Then we will know how to actually make decisions about those different priorities. So God is not just a part of the pie of our time. God is actually at the centre of the pie. He's the centre of everything we do. This means that we are God's people. We are the church. Wherever we go, whatever we do. We are the church gathered this morning, guys. Isn't that wonderful?
Take a collection.
Thanks. On Sunday, we gather. So on Sunday, God's people gather. We gather to be nourished, we gather to be encouraged, we gather to worship God. And then, on Monday, from Monday to Saturday, we are actually scattered. We're scattered out to the different places that we go. It's not like we stop being church at that point. We are still church. We are still God's people. We're just in the places where God has actually set us to be. So what does this look like? What does it mean? It means that your work is part of your church service. Isn't that great? You never have to feel guilty again when someone says, are you doing much for your church? Yes, I'm doing church's work when I go to work. We've got to see that as part of what we're doing as God's people. I guess I should put a little caveat on that. As long as it's something you do feel called by God to do. So if you feel, this is something you've got to wrestle with God. If you think that God has given you the gifts, the experience, has actually allowed you to do this work, if you feel this is where God wants you to be, then do it with all your heart. And that's something only you can work out with God. In Genesis 2:15, the first thing God actually told human beings to do was work. Yeah, you can read that. The first thing that God actually tells people to do is to work the earth and keep the garden. Till the earth, keep the garden. And those Hebrew verb roots, this is the dangerous thing about working in a Bible college, you end up going to Hebrew class. Those Hebrew verb roots for work, ahad, and for keep, shamar, are actually used later in Numbers and Deuteronomy for worshipping or serving God and keeping the commandments. So actually, that's part of our worship, is the work that we do. And I've actually come up with a new word. It's going to be the title of my first book. Look out for it. Workship. Workship. Just think about that. You're not going to work today, you're going to workship. Okay, may not catch on. But I hope it encourages you to think about your work as worship. Maybe that reframes what you see as your work. It's actually a way that you're worshiping God. I do work with churches to help leaders to grasp this subject, because I think our Sunday gathering should be the opportunity to actually fill up people who are then going to be scattered out, to actually see that as the opportunity we have to nourish and encourage and teach people so that they are able to go out into the fields, the offices, the factories, to continue working for the Lord. My hope is that churches will be more affirming to workers about the work that they do. My hope is that churches would help to train and equip us so that we can be visible Christians in our workplaces. And I would love for our churches to actually enter into our workplaces a bit more. That people would come to pray for us in our workplaces, would have a look at the work that we do and encourage us. And can I just say that there is one church leader who is here today who has entered the workplace of one of his parishioners. I won't identify them, but that's the church coming to work is happening right now this morning, and that's fantastic. So the reality is that this is happening. People are doing this, and I want to tell you 3 stories of people who are. So first of all, I'm going to tell you about Lee. Now, Lee came to Australia to actually study at Melbourne Uni for his PhD. He came from China. He got much more than a PhD. He actually found Jesus. He didn't expect that at all, and it completely rocked his world and his plans. He was a surgeon in China. He'd come here to do his PhD. He had 2 careers ahead of him, to be a surgeon or to become a medical academic. But his concern was that he had this new, fragile faith. There was so much he wanted to learn about Jesus and about God. And he realised, having been a surgeon previously, that if he took up that role, it was so consuming of his time and his self that he may not be able to nourish this new faith that he had. And he was worried about being an academic, that the same thing would happen. He would be just starting out in that career. So he made a choice. It's a choice probably most of us would have made. He decided to retrain as a GP. So he went back and retrained for a number of years to become a GP, because he felt in that role he would actually have more flexibility in his time, and during his time of study he would be able to nourish his faith. Well, he's done that, and he now works 4 days a week, and 3 days he actually dedicates to a Chinese congregation out at Ivanhoe. In doing that, he doesn't separate out those 2 things. He actually sees that God gave him a gift of healing. That's why he wanted to become a doctor in the first place, but he now sees that actually this was a gift from God, that he works with God in his practice. He prays about the patients that he's going to see, and sometimes if they're willing, he will pray with his patients actually in the surgery. He feels that God actually leads him to uncover some of the problems that he sees that he's not sure about. And then when he's doing his church work, he sees that's a different sort of healing. He calls it the healing of souls. So that's the way he's done his balance. That's the way he's worked out how he can bridge these 2 things. I want to tell you another story. This story is about Rowan. Rowan is an entrepreneur. He runs a fruit and veggie business. And he decided he needed to get more to the core of what his business was about. So he bought another business that operated in the markets. He bought this business, and then he got a terrible shock. There were horrible practices that were going on that hadn't actually been uncovered when he did the due diligence. Those sort of practices were things like employees were being paid mostly in cash, so there was all these expenses hidden in the books. there were bribes that were paid to the people to get the best produce in the markets. This was common practice. The worst thing he found, which was pretty horrible, there were some people who were working in that company who were only working there because they were the mistresses of some of the senior employees. Horrible practices. He faced that, and he went to the church, his church on Sunday, and he said to his minister, I am facing these terrible things in this new business I bought, and I have no idea what to do. What should I do? The minister replied to him, well, I'll pray for you, but please make sure that that doesn't interrupt your church work, your church responsibilities. He left that church. And he came to the church that I was part of. Same thing, he walked up to the minister the next Sunday at our church, and he said to the minister, I'm facing these terrible things in my workplace. I don't know what to do. And my minister said to him, will you take me to work tomorrow? Take me out to your place. Let me have a look around. I'll pray with you. And then, my door is open if you want to have conversations about how to go forward. Completely different approach. Rome did stay in our church. And over the next 2 years, he had this process of actually redeeming the workplace. He slowly changed all the practices, and he was able to transform not just that workplace, but some of the other businesses in the market started saying, hey, those guys are being paid properly. They get super, they get holidays. We want to be paid like that. The produce sellers actually realised that he will pay them a fair price, but he would set up a relationship with them where they could actually depend on his custom rather than him just going off and going to the next person who would accept the bribe. So it really changed practices, not just in his business, but wider. So church went to work in that case. And finally, I want to tell you about Iris. Iris I met in December. She works in the CBD in the workplace, and she did what I often encourage Christians to do if you have an opportunity in the workplace, which is join the social committee. That's a way of really getting into the heart of the fun things that happen at work. So she joined the social committee, and they said, we need to organise the end of year function. Does anyone want to do it? And usually on those committees, everyone sits on their hands at that point because it's a lot of work. Well, Iris put her hand up and said, I'll organise it, no problem, just leave it with me. What she did was she then went to church the next Sunday, which was the Sunday I was at her church, and she said, okay, I need volunteers to come to my workplace to help run this function. And I talked to her afterwards and I said, what are you going to do? She actually got a group from her church to come and sing carols to the workers, because she said it's Christmas, they'll want to hear carols. And then she was able to explain what the carols were about and what Christmas was about. And then she got her church people, after they'd sung the carols, she made them work really hard, she got them to actually serve the food at the function, and then they just got into conversations with the fellow workers. And the workers were saying, why are you doing this? Are you being paid? And they said, no, we're not being paid. We're here because we go to Iris's church and we want to bless the people that she works with. What a witness, an amazing way to make the church visible in the workplace in a really lovely way. So there's some different creative things that people are doing to try and work out how we can actually connect these things instead of seeing them as competing priorities. So my advice to you is don't see church and work as some sort of balancing act. See your work as part of what you do as church, as actually being God's people out there in the world. And don't see God as an extra thing on your to-do list. I think that's a horrible place to put God. Actually see God as the centre of everything you do, and you begin to see how that works out. Paul tells the Corinthians, so whether you eat or drink, which we've been doing this morning, or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. I see this whole principle really beautifully displayed in our reading on your notes from 1 Peter. In chapter 2, Peter starts out by giving that beautiful description of what it means to be the people of God. He actually takes something that was said at the foot of Mount Sinai in Exodus 19:6. You'll see really similar words, but he actually puts that in the context of what Jesus has done. Because of what Jesus has done, we are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. So there's a beautiful description of the church. And what happens next? You see those next couple of verses that come after it. In the NIV, it actually sections off those two sections. We have the description of the church, and then the NIV heading is living godly lives in a pagan society. That's what we do at work, guys. The sort of society that Peter was writing to is a lot like our workplaces. They're places where people don't honour God, where sometimes it's very antagonistic to be a Christian. And then Peter goes on to describe what we should do, how we should live in that context. He says, verse 12, live such good lives among the pagans that though they may accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. So there you go. That's what we are to do. That's the connection between church and everyday life. So now I work in a Bible college. So you must think, oh, that's so easy. It's not. Even at Ridley College, I must daily make sure that what I'm doing is serving God and serving others. I have to reframe myself. I have to fight for justice. I have to seek to redeem my workplace. Even Christian workplaces need redeeming. I look to my church to help and support me. I seek ways of using my gifts and experience in my church. I've just joined the fundraising committee. Anyway, so each of us must seek out what serving God and serving his people looks like in all the work we do, whether it's our paid work or our unpaid work, in all the areas of our lives. What does it look like? It will be different for each one of us. So don't juggle church and work. Look for creative ways to bring church and work together to actually bridge Sunday and Monday. Thank you.